Hey there, this is Matt Petrowski. This is a follow-up video. I'm going to try to make this really short. It's based on a comment that was made in a video that I recently shot where we got this type of question in the chat. It came from HBH Group, and it was, for example, field A has the auto-enter calculation of, this is the calculation right here, evaluate quote field when field 1 changes, field A is cleared out, so no script trigger is needed to do so. Now, I misread the calculation terribly. In fact, probably made a fool of myself by saying, yes, this is a dangerous function. No, this is not a dangerous function. What most FileMaker developers do when they see the evaluate function is they run to the hills and they are scared because the evaluate exposes FileMaker's calculation engine. And if you do that in the user interface, it can cause some security possible problems. So I'm going to show you how I would solve this particular problem. This particular function is completely valid. This is completely okay, and let me explain why. First off, the evaluate function, the first parameter that it receives, which we'll see, it evaluates the contents that are right here. Now, if those contents came from a user accessible location, such as a field, then it would be a problem. But in this situation, it's not a problem because he controls the calculation right here. He's only using FileMaker's quote function in order to actually return a double set of quotes with an empty space, which is basically nothing, which is saying, FileMaker, I want you to evaluate nothing, which is going to be nothing. And because it's nothing, then what I want you to return is, what I want to reference is this field. So this is a very backwards sort of thinking here in terms of the way that this reads. First off, you're saying, for this field, I want you to evaluate, or I want you to result into nothing. And I want you to result into nothing anytime that these fields, the fields that follow this, are actually modified. So in this case, it's saying, if I modify field 1, I want you to evaluate into nothing. And what he's doing here is he's attempting to clear a field based on another field. So let's take a look at that in practice. Let's look at FileMaker, what we have over here. Now I have 3 different sets of examples right here. The first one is a method that I use. The second one is the method that is our calculation that we're seeing. And the third one is the one that's actually dangerous, what I was referring to. So let's take a look at the first one. We're going to put hello world into each of these. Hello, and we'll evaluate what is the difference here. And what's the objective? Ultimately, the objective is to actually clear the second field based on the fact that the first field changes, or at least that's what I'm presuming. And we'll put hello world here as well. In fact, we have to get rid of that question mark right there, and it's going to get the question mark. We'll see why. This last example, this is the one that I was thinking it was, and this is what I was afraid of. Mostly because, as a developer, I saw the evaluate function, and usually we just rarely use that. So let's look at the end result. What happens? Well, when I come in here and I change hello to another, and I tab, my second field is cleared by virtue of the fact that I've entered a new value into the first field. So if I say another planet, and I go back to that field, I keep my 2 values, but if I change this one back to hello, it makes me choose again a value to put into the second field, and that's probably the intended result. Now here is the exact same thing. I've got field 1, field 2, field A, field B, field 1, and field _2. So this is the same thing. This uses the calculation that we just took a look at. So if I say another here, it actually clears. But down here, we've got our problem. So let's look at the 3 calculations that we have right here. Wrong key. All right, we go into define database, and we can see that on all of them, they are all auto-enter calculations. And when we look at this, the auto-enter, we have turned off the do not replace because we do want to replace the values. Now for this first set, we have my preferred method of actually solving that right here. Now this is the way that I like to work, and we'll put in evaluate, and we will put in quote, And this is what we have in that first example, and we have then field 1 for my particular case. Both of these are exactly the same. Well, not exactly the same, because the calculation engine may vary in terms of, microseconds way down the line in terms of how it gets evaluated. But the result of them is the same. And here's how they read. We already took a look at this one. What is it that we're going to evaluate? What is the FileMaker calculation that we're going to evaluate? In this case, we're evaluating FileMaker's quote function. What are we passing into this? Well, just a simple set of double quotes. That means nothing. We're telling FileMaker we want you to evaluate into nothing based on these referenced fields. And you can have multiple referenced fields. This is actually an advanced way to think about how to solve this problem. You can have field 1, field 2, field 3. And if any of those changed, 1, 2, or 3 are modified, the evaluate is in turn triggered. And that causes it to return or result in nothing. Now, the quote here isn't actually necessary, I don't think. You could probably just have the double set of quotes. You don't need the quote, so there's a little bit extra on the code, and we can test that out. But here's how I actually would perform or achieve the same thing. Again, there's multiple ways to do the same thing in FileMaker. I would choose to use a let function, and I say let trigger. Now, trigger can be any number of fields that you're going to reference. And the way that FileMaker's calculation engine works is that anything in the whole of a calculation that's used for auto enter, any field that is referenced in the actual calculation, if it is modified, changed, anything is done to it, it forces the evaluation of this calculation. And it's actually a key piece of knowledge that you can use in order to make things happen, such as this. You change something in one field and it affects another field. That's what we want. So in this regard, I use the let function and I say, let the trigger be equal to this particular field. But you can actually say it can apply to multiple fields. So I could use, let's say, for example, a list function, and this could be field 1 and field A. So if either of those fields are modified in this situation, what would it look like over here? Well, it would just look like this. If I want you to evaluate into nothing if field 1 or field A is changed. Same thing here. I want you to use this trigger, and I'm going to use the reference to these fields, field 1, field A, and I want you to result into nothing. So the difference is the order here, but the result is the same. This one, the order is, FileMaker, I want to look at these fields, and if any of them change, I want you to give me nothing. Over here, it's FileMaker, I want you to give me nothing if you look at these fields. And that's really what it boils down to. So I hope this lesson has helped out with regards to those differences right there. Let's take a look at where things can go really bad. Here in our field 1 and our field 2, and I'll cancel out of this. But for this auto enter, for this field 1, this is how I actually read the calculation. And I did it incorrectly by being a little too expressive there about how dangerous it could be. There's no danger at all in the function that he was using. So my apologies, HBH group. Let's learn from this lesson. The evaluate function, whenever it's going to evaluate code, this expression right here is what can be dangerous. Because when we pass into that evaluation anything that is FileMaker code, if a general user using the database happens to know FileMaker, if they can put any type of FileMaker code into a field and it's going to evaluate that, we can actually see the contents of things that maybe we didn't intend to see. So let's take a look. This is FileMaker hacking if you want to know. With this particular setup, what I'm saying is, FileMaker, I want you to evaluate the contents that are in field 1, and you're going to, and the rest of this doesn't even really matter. It's basically saying, if field 2 is modified or changed, evaluate the contents of field 1. But if field 1 itself is modified, it's going to evaluate this field. Remember, it's any FileMaker reference within this calculation that's actually going to trigger it. So it doesn't matter whether I put something in field 2 or I put something in field 1. the fact is that evaluate is going to evaluate the contents of this field. Now let's take a look and see what could happen or what could go wrong as a FileMaker developer by exposing the evaluate function. So what we have right now is a situation where if I put anything into field 2, it's going to evaluate the contents of field 1. Now we've already recognized that field 1 can be any valid FileMaker calculation. So let's see what we could do. I could, into a local variable or a global variable, if somehow I can determine that you're exposing a variable on the screen, or if I'm able to somehow get access to variables, then I'm able to expose certain things. Now you do have to, the developer sort of has to know what's going on within FileMaker, but let's follow along. So I'm going to put a variable on my screen or on my layout. Let's go right here. Again, the developer in this regard, or the hacker, let's say, would have to actually know that this variable is actually a merge variable on the screen. I'll just call it data. So we have this variable on screen that is using a global variable in order to display some content. Now, this is a very common thing for FileMaker developers to do, is to use a variable, and oftentimes a global variable, on the layout so that you can change things. This can vary. Data can contain some helpful message, or it can contain some, no message, so you want to show nothing. But with that on the layout, I would, because I have access to this field, and in turn, FileMaker's calculation engine, I'm able to set that value to something. So let's look at what I could set it to. I can type a valid FileMaker calculation. Let data equal to, in this case, I'll put something, and then I can really put anything. It doesn't really matter right here. But the fact of the matter is, I'm able to evaluate this. The evaluate is evaluating the contents of this field. Danger, danger, danger. When I exit out of this, and if I change this, granted, FileMaker doesn't immediately update its user interface. What I would have to do in this case is I would have to zoom out. Let's see if I could go to another. I can't refresh as a hacker right here. I need another layout really quickly. Let me add a new layout. We'll just make it blank. We'll say OK, and we'll be done with it. We'll go back into browse mode, and we will go back to logical functions. And there we get our result. So something has now been updated. We can see it's on the layout. Here's the nuance. FileMaker does not refresh its screen immediately when a change has been made. So you can see that I can change this to another thing. And FileMaker didn't immediately refresh the screen. I actually have to go to another layout or cause FileMaker to refresh the screen in order to get it to update. But FileMaker has these very exposing functions called the design functions. And I'm going to need to look one up. Let's look at my documentation, dash, and let's go to, well, I could do it actually in the data viewer. I have it right there in FileMaker. Why not use that? I'll use the data viewer and take a look at it really quickly here. We'll zoom out a little bit more. We will go over to the design functions, and we will zoom in and take a look at those. All right, here are our dangerous things. Layout object names, I could find out that. Field names with file name and layout name. Let's just take that one for grins. We'll select over here, and we'll put the field names. We'll zoom out, and we will copy that, and we will look at this. So let's take a quick look at the field names. File name right here as a parameter can actually be a simple set of quotes, which means this current file name. And the layout name can use, in turn, another get function. So a knowledgeable FileMaker developer would just say get layout name. So this becomes a valid function now. It's a design function that was released in, I think, FileMaker 5. And what happens is field names is going to give me all of the field names on this layout, and I'm able to see that. Now, there's other ways to get other data, the layout objects, etc. It basically just exposes things. So now let's take that knowledge. We'll close the data viewer here, and let's go put it into that function. Let data be equal to, and again, this is really predicated on a lot of ifs in this particular case. if a person can find out that you have a variable and it's being used on the screen in order to see that. Otherwise, they'd have to have access to the data viewer. But again, this information can be, this meta information about the database can be retrieved in various ways. So one of the reasons that recent versions of FileMaker have actually had to close things off, such as Apple Events and AppleScript and I forget what it is on Windows, and running URLs and things like that, you have to now turn those on, where in the past, hackers were able to dig through a FileMaker database and find things. But with this evaluating now, let's go to the layout, come back to the layout, and there we go. Those are our fields that are on the actual, you can see that I've returned, because I was able to evaluate a FileMaker calculation from within a field, I was able to set it into a variable, which that variable is actually exposed on the layout. Again, a lot of ifs, but you can see the danger right here. Because of FileMaker's design functions, I'm able to really go in and dig around in a FileMaker database and sort of try to find out whatever I can about a FileMaker database. So let's look at some of the other design functions and see what could potentially be exposed. We go to the design functions. We'll scroll this out so that we can see all of them. Zoom in, center, and all right. Database names will tell us how many databases are opened. Field bounds, really not too consequential. Field comments. Sometimes you may be keeping some secret information on your field comments. If you don't know that that can be exposed via a design function, it can. So you might want to keep comments pretty generic on your fields. Where is this? This is in the define database right here. So if I have field 2 and I say, this is the field which holds my password, well, I can read those comments using FileMaker's design function to get the field comments. So first I get a list of all of the fields, then I get a list of all of your comments on all of your fields, trying to find out how you are using your FileMaker fields. FileMaker hacking. I'm basically teaching you how to hack FileMaker here. Hopefully it's valuable enough that it allows you to keep your database, well, let's go ahead and change that, a little more secure. I mean, that's what it's worth to learn FileMaker. Let's go back to those design functions and talk about some of the other ones. Design functions, let's zoom in. All right, so we've got our field comments, field IDs. Really not too consequential unless we actually find out how this particular database is structured, if they're using IDs. This is all internal to FileMaker. IDs don't mean a whole lot. Field names allows me to actually use those field names to get things such as the field comments or try to find out the contents of those data, because you can get the contents of a field name if you know that field name. And if the field isn't on the layout, meaning it is data you're trying to hide, but I'm able to find out what the name of that field is, I can go look at the contents of it. Maybe you're storing things in those fields that you don't want people to actually see. If you expose it through the Evaluate, I can get at it. Field repetitions, no big deal. Style, no big deal. Type, really no big deal. Serial number, maybe helpful. Layout names. Hey, I'm able to find out the names of layouts other than the ones that you've exposed to me through FileMaker's system of the menus. I can find out all the other layout names. Maybe you have a layout that's, a hidden layout that has hidden information. Maybe you have named objects on that hidden layout. Well, if I can find out all of the layout names, then I can use the next one in line, which is layout object names. And I can find out all of the names of objects on that particular layout. Then, if you've got content within those objects, I can try to dig that content out using another function called getLayoutObjectAttribute. FileMaker hacking. Relationship info, not super big deal, but might help me out if I'm trying to find out how things are connected. Script IDs, not big. Table IDs, not big. Script names. This is a big one. If you want to know, it is possible to, boy, should I expose this? Ugh. Difficult one. It is possible to trigger FileMaker scripts on a local copy of FileMaker as long as you have their names. and I just won't tell you how to do it. I'll keep that one secret, and I'll let you find out how and if there is a way to do it. There is a way to do it. It's not native. I'll say that, and I'll stop there. I just really don't want to give that much information about how easy it is to expose all of the scripts and get them. And again, please, this is all predicated on the fact that it's only going to happen if the database is exposing FileMaker's calculation engine to the end user, meaning the user can somehow evaluate something. That's why users don't like the evaluate function. If a user can get into layout mode and they can actually access the calculation engine through the inspector or something like that, all bets are off. It's basically, as soon as the user gets access to the calculation engine, if they know FileMaker, then they can get the list of scripts. Then they could do this technique where they install something and then run those scripts and just start to try to run them. And maybe one of them is a developer script. Table IDs, no big deal. Like I said, table names. Well, if you give me all your table names, I can go try to look for all the fields in all of those tables and then try to see the data. Value lists, value list names, value list items. It can be helpful for me if you've got field values coming or values coming from a field. I can look at all of the different possible values. Maybe some of them are or are not exposed to me. Window names. Maybe you are drawing windows off screen somewhere. Well, if I'm able to see that, then I can possibly try to bring some of those windows forward. And again, hacking FileMaker is actually really difficult. You have to know a lot of different things. FileMaker's done a good job of closing things down, but knowing that the evaluate is a scary function for some developers, it's because they know that it exposes FileMaker's calculation engine. But again, as I wrap up this particular video, which I'm going a little longer than I should on this topic here, this particular method of using the evaluate right here, it's really not that big of a deal. You don't have to worry. Anytime that you are taking full control over the evaluate function and you know that it's not exposed to users, then you're going to be okay. And here we can actually test that you don't need the quote in this scenario with the evaluate. You're basically just saying, if field A is changed, just give me a single set of quotes, which should clear things out without the quote, and we'll wrap it up on that. So let's put in hello world here and see if it actually still works without the... All right, and we put in another, and it should evaluate to clear. So there we go. We don't necessarily need the quote in that regards. Just another little tidbit that we learned about FileMaker there. I hope this has helped out and hasn't given you too many ideas in terms of becoming a black hat FileMaker hacker. All right, so just wanted to clarify that up because I really felt bad about saying it was so dangerous. All right, until next time, see you later.